The morning of my wedding dawned with a sky so painfully blue it felt like a personal insult. I remember standing at the arched window of my childhood bedroom, the cold leaded glass under my fingertips, watching the hired staff string the last of the fairy lights through the ancient oak in the garden. The air smelled of cut grass and impending rain, a contradiction that should have been my first warning. Everything was a contradiction that day. The pristine white of my dress hanging from the wardrobe door, a ghost already occupying my future. The hollow echo in my chest where joy was supposed to reside. The serene smile I had practiced in the mirror that felt like a crack in porcelain. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Alexander Sterling, heir to a fortune built on timber and steel, was a man sculpted by ambition and old money. He had a smile that could disarm a boardroom and a gaze that made you feel like the only woman in the world. For 2 years, I had basked in that gaze, convinced I had won the grand prize of love. Our engagement was a media sensation, The Artist and the Heir, a fairy tale for the modern age. I, Ilara Vance, a painter with a modest but growing reputation, had captured the most elusive bachelor in the city. The pre-ceremony chaos was a contained hurricane. My mother, a flurry of silk and anxiety, fussed with the lace on my veil. My bridesmaids, my sister Clara, chief among them, giggled over glasses of champagne, their voices a bright, chirping soundtrack to my numbness. I felt like an imposter in my own skin, going through the motions, a doll being dressed for a pageant. "You look ethereal, darling," my mother breathed, her eyes glistening, absolutely ethereal. I saw only a stranger in the reflection, a woman swathed in satin and illusion. It was Clara who, with her characteristic perceptiveness, slipped a small silver flask into my hand. "For the nerves," she whispered, her warm brown eyes crinkling with sympathy. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not an altar." I took a grateful sip, the whiskey burning a path of false courage down my throat. "Just pre-wedding jitters," I lied, the phrase ash on my tongue. "Well, jitter all you want," she said, adjusting a stray curl. "But in 20 minutes you're marching down that aisle to a man who adores you, so pull it together, sis. Adores you." The words echoed in the hollow space inside me. Something was off. It had been for weeks, a subtle shift in Alexander, a distance in his eyes that I'd chalked up to pre-wedding stress. He'd been preoccupied, his phone always close, his smiles a little too quick, a little too brittle. With 15 minutes to go, the coordinator, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Beatrice, herded my bridesmaids towards the grand staircase of my family's country home, where the ceremony was to be held in the garden. The room emptied, leaving me in a sudden, profound silence. The only sound was the frantic thud of my own heart. That's when I realized I didn't have my something old. It was my grandmother's lace handkerchief, a delicate thing of Irish linen, and I'd left it in the small, wood-paneled study downstairs that my father used as a temporary office for the event. The room was just off the main hall, near the back entrance, where the groom and his party were supposedly sequestered. I made a decision. A moment of solitude, a final gathering of my thoughts before the plunge, seemed like a gift. I wouldn't summon a flustered bridesmaid. I would get it myself. I slipped out of the room, my silk slippers silent on the polished oak floors. The house was a maze of bustling staff and distant chatter, but the main hall was momentarily empty. As I approached the study door, which was slightly ajar, I heard voices. Low, tense, masculine voices, Alexander's and his best man, Marcus. My hand reaching for the doorknob froze. "You need to calm down, Alex," Marcus was saying, his tone the familiar, placating one he always used when Alexander was on edge. "It's cold feet. Every groom gets them." "This isn't cold feet, Marcus." Alexander's voice was strained, raw, with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. It was anguish. This This is a life sentence. I'm standing at the edge of the abyss, and I'm about to jump. The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned against the cool wall, my breath catching in my throat. Life sentence, abyss. You love Ilara? Marcus insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Do I? Alexander let out a short, bitter laugh. Or do I love the idea of her? The beautiful, talented artist who makes me look cultured and sensitive. The perfect accessory for the sterling legacy. Each word was a shard of glass, embedding itself in my heart. Accessory, idea. Then why, Alex? For God's sake, why are you doing this? Marcus sounded exasperated. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the struggle within him, the war between his carefully constructed image and whatever truth was clawing its way out. Because of the company, Alexander finally said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I had to press my ear closer to the door jamb to hear. The board, my father, you know the quarterly reports are a disaster. The merger with Vance Industries is the only thing that will stop the stock from plummeting. Her father's investment, his connections. It's a bailout, Marcus, a beautifully wrapped, socially acceptable bailout. Marrying Ilara saves Sterling Enterprises. It's that simple. The world tilted on its axis. The floor beneath my feet seemed to liquefy. Vance Industries, merger, bailout. It had never been about me. It had never been about my laugh, or the way I saw the world in shades of cerulean and burnt sienna, or the quiet conversations we shared in his library late at night. It was about my father's money. I was a business transaction, a hostage in a gilded cage, purchased to save a failing empire. And Sophia? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. The name was a second, more precise strike. Sophia, his sleek, sharp-edged ex-girlfriend, the one who worked in high finance, the one I'd always felt was watching me from the shadows with a knowing, pitying smile. A ragged sigh. Sophia, she understands. It's business. We have an understanding. After things stabilize. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The understanding was clear. I was the temporary, necessary wife. She was the future, once I had served my purpose. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a glacial calm that was the absolute opposite of the hysteria I should have been feeling. The pain was so acute it had short-circuited my nerves, leaving behind a vast, empty plain of clarity. The fairy tale was a lie. The castle was a prison. The prince was a broker. I didn't hear the rest. I pushed myself away from the wall, my body moving on autopilot. I walked back to my room, my steps measured and steady. I passed my mother, who was wringing her hands. There you are. We were about to send a search party. I gave her a smile, a real one this time, because it was forged in the fires of a terrible, liberating truth. Just needed a moment, Mother. I'm ready now. In the room, I picked up my bouquet of white gardenias and roses. Their scent, once intoxicating, now smelled funereal. Clara looked at me, her head tilted. You okay? You look different. I am, I said, my voice steady. I've never been more clear-headed in my life. The music began, the processional, the opening notes of the canon in D, a song I had always loved and now would forever associate with the sound of my own heart shattering. The great oak doors to the garden were opened. A sea of faces turned towards us, smiling, expectant. At the end of the long, petal-strewn aisle, standing under a canopy of woven willow, was Alexander. He looked breathtakingly handsome in his morning suit, his blonde hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight, and he was smiling at me, the perfect, practiced boardroom smile. As I took my father's arm, I met Alexander's eyes across the distance. For a fraction of a second I saw it, a flicker of panic, of guilt, quickly masked by adoration. He thought I was the naive artist, the innocent he was so cleverly sacrificing on the altar of commerce. He had no idea that the woman walking towards him in her virginal white dress was no longer Ilara the bride. She was Ilara the Avenger. The plan formed in my mind with the swift, brutal efficiency of a lightning strike. I would not run. I would not cry. I would not give him the satisfaction of a messy, emotional scene. He wanted a transaction, then a transaction he would get. But I would be the one to set the terms. I would be the one to profit. I reached the altar. My father kissed my cheek, his eyes moist, and placed my hand in Alexander's. His grip was firm, possessive, cold. The minister, a jovial man with a kind face, began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." I didn't hear the words. I was calculating. I was planning. I was watching Alexander, studying the subtle tells of his deception. The way his thumb stroked my knuckles, a gesture I'd once found comforting, now felt like a brand. The way his gaze occasionally flickered towards a brunette in the third row. Sophia, dressed in a deceptively simple navy blue dress, a small, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. We reached the vows. "Alexander James Sterling," the minister intoned, "do you take Ilara Rose Vance to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" Alexander looked into my eyes, his gaze deep and seemingly sincere. "I do," he said, his voice clear and strong, echoing in the quiet garden. The liar. The minister turned to me. "Ilara Rose Vance, do you take Alexander James Sterling to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" There was a pause, a perfect breathless silence. Every guest leaned in, expecting a tearful, joyous "I do." I let the silence stretch. I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Alexander's eyes. Then I smiled. It was not a bride smile. It was the cool, composed smile of a woman closing a deal. I gently extracted my hand from Alexander's grip. I turned to face the congregation, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a fierce, exhilarating power. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice projecting easily across the stunned crowd. "It means so much to Alexander and me that you could be here to witness this significant moment." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. My mother looked pale. Clara's eyes were wide with alarm and dawning understanding. "Marriage," I continued, "is a sacred union. It's built on trust, respect, and above all, honesty." I turned my gaze back to Alexander, whose face had begun to drain of color. "Isn't that right, Alexander?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I was in the hall earlier," I said, my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I overheard a fascinating conversation. It was about mergers and bailouts. It was about Sterling Enterprises and Vance Industries. It was about how marrying me was a life sentence and standing at the edge of the abyss." Gasps erupted from the crowd. My father stood up, his face a thundercloud. Sophia had the decency to look down, her cheeks flushed. "You see," I said, addressing the guests again, "Alexander here seems to believe that love is a transaction, that I am an accessory to be acquired to stabilize his company's falling stock. He has an understanding with his ex-girlfriend Sophia over there." I gestured gracefully towards her. "An understanding that presumably begins once my usefulness has expired." The scene descended into chaos. People were whispering, shouting. Cameras, which had been forbidden until the reception, were suddenly in hands, phones held aloft, capturing the unfolding scandal. Alexander found his voice. "Ilara, this is insane. You're hysterical," he hissed, grabbing my arm. I shook him off with a strength that surprised us both. "I am many things, Alexander, but I am not hysterical. I am lucid, and I believe in fair trade. I reached into the delicate silk pouch tied to my bouquet, the one that was supposed to hold my wedding ring. Instead, I pulled out a small black digital voice recorder. I held it up for everyone to see. "A bride, something new," I announced. "State-of-the-art, high-definition audio." I went back for my handkerchief and decided a little insurance policy was in order. "It captured your entire confession, Alexander. Your life sentence, your bailout, your understanding with Sophia." The look on his face was priceless. It was a car crash of horror, fury, and sheer unadulterated shock. The master of the universe had been outmaneuvered. "So," I said, turning to face my father, whose expression had shifted from fury to a grim, proud satisfaction, "it seems the proposed merger is off the table. However, to avoid the unpleasantness of this recording finding its way to the Wall Street Journal and every major news outlet, I believe a severance package is in order." I looked Alexander dead in the eye. "You wanted a business deal. Let's make one. You will sign over to me the deed to the Sterling family's coastal estate in Maine, the one I love, the one you always said was too isolated. You will also transfer $5 million into an account of my choosing. In return, you get this recording, my silence, and we go our separate ways. You save your company from a scandal that would sink it far faster than any bad quarterly report, and I get compensation for my time, my affection, and the profound violation of my trust." The garden was utterly silent now. You could have heard a petal drop. "You're blackmailing me," Alexander whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "I'm negotiating," I corrected him calmly. "You taught me that everything has a price. You just severely underestimated mine." My father stepped forward. "I'll have my lawyers draw up the agreement immediately," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The transfer of the property and the funds. You have 1 hour, Alexander, before I release a statement to the press about Sterling Enterprises' attempted hostile takeover of my daughter's life." The fight went out of Alexander then. He looked from my father's implacable face to my resolute one, to the sea of horrified, judging faces of his friends, family, and business associates. He was checkmated. He gave a single curt nod. I didn't wait for the paperwork. I didn't look back. I handed the recorder to my father, who pocketed it with a grim smile. Then I turned to Clara, who was beaming at me with tears of fierce pride in her eyes. "Come on," I said, taking her hand. "Help me get out of this dress." I walked back up the aisle, not as a jilted bride, but as a woman who had just reclaimed her life. The guests parted for me, a river of stunned silence. As I reached the doors, I paused and looked over my shoulder one last time. Alexander was standing alone at the altar, a broken figure in his finery, the ruins of his ambitions scattered around him. "Oh! And Alexander?" I called out, my voice ringing clear in the hush. "I'd wish you well, but frankly, I don't." And with that, I stepped out of the garden and into my new future, the sound of my own freedom roaring in my ears, a symphony more beautiful than any wedding march. The revenge was not sweet. It was necessary, it was surgical, and it was only the beginning.